Good morning. This is Crystal Woods with Seasons of the Vine, and it's Fresh Friday. Thanks for joining me today. We're picking back up with the Esther series, and we have this week where we're going to be in Esther 9, and then, nope, not true, Esther 8, and then next week we're going to finish the Esther series with 9 and 10 because 10's like this big. And I'm going to put them together, and then I'm going to do a whole bunch of just topics or things that the Lord has put on my heart, different scriptures to break down. And I'm really excited because I've been just getting downloads of different ways to just continue to encourage you in your walk with the Lord and in understanding salvation and sanctification and just obedience to Him and discipleship and all the good things. So very excited to be finishing up Esther. Really enjoyed it. Boy, we've had a lot of takeaways. So if you've missed any of the Esther series, go back over the last couple of months. We've broken down chapter by chapter, verse by verse, just a general look into Esther. There's always more. There's always more. I mean, even scholars spend years digesting and breaking down verses, and there's still more because our God is limitless, and His word is living and active, and what even stands out to us today will maybe hit different in a couple of years as the Holy Spirit moves within us as we read the word and brings things to light in the right timing for us to receive and understand. That's illumination. And that changes as we grow, and it just changes as our relationship with the Lord deepens. So anywho, Esther 8 is where we're going to be today. On that day, King Ahasuerus, or your Bible might say Xerxes, they're the same person. King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. So Esther has revealed to the king, has made it known to the king that Mordecai is her family member. And this Mordecai is the same one the king wanted to just celebrate a couple chapters earlier. And so now she's openly sharing her lineage and her family, where she comes from. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So what you need to understand is that the property of criminals, those who were found guilty, was confiscated by the kingdom, by the king, by the empire, whoever was ruling at the time. And so what the king has decided to do is give that to Esther, who then puts Mordecai over that house, which was Haman's. Also, the signet rings are very important. They are the ring of authority. They say that whatever is stamped with that ring has the backing of the king. Really, really important concept and idea. So Haman had it. Remember, he had a lot of authority given to him by King Ahasuerus. King Ahasuerus hasn't been the greatest judge of character. I'm not even sure he really cared, because we're talking about an immoral person who doesn't even know Yahweh. And so we have to sometimes not expect godly attributes to come out of ungodly people. It just doesn't work like that. And so he gave Haman, this evil man, a lot of authority, giving him that signet ring. Whatever he declared, and that ring stamped with the seal, then it was approved by the king. So now that same ring has been taken from Haman and is now given to Mordecai. Big deal. This is huge favor. And the favor is just going to be increased. You can see God's hand. Like when God's hand of favor is upon you, oh man, doors open and doors shut that aren't for you. You just see the Red Sea parting, if you will, in so many areas that are just not working for others or didn't work for you before. But when God moves, and nothing can slow that down. So verse 3, then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. So the problem is that edict of death against the Jews is still active. So even though Haman's been taken care of, Esther and Mordecai are taken care of, the Jewish people are still in a quandary. They're in trouble. So she's pleading again. And now let's see what the king does. Verse 4, when the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. So once again, she's seeking his audience. This is a life or death situation. He goes ahead and holds out the golden scepter, which was her being given permission to approach the king. And she said, if it pleases the king, and if I found favor in his sight, and if this thing seems right before the king. So she's basically saying, it's your call, it's your call, it's your call. I have no authority here. I understand my position. It's your call. Over and over again, she's proclaiming that he's the one in power. And I am pleasing in his eyes. Let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite and the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people, or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? Okay, so she's just seeking that something else be sent out to undo what Haman has tried to do and what is going to come to pass. Now, let me check my notes here, make sure I'm not missing anything up to this point. Oh, yes, this one thing I wanted to share. So the property of the enemy was taken. The evil man Haman, everything he had was given to Esther. And it reminded me of the Egyptians and the Israelites. So the Israelites were in bondage to the Egyptians for 400 years, 4 centuries. And in that time, they worked and worked and worked, and Egypt grew in wealth and all kinds of things. But when they walked out of their bondage, they took the wealth of Egypt with them. And so Exodus 12:35 through 36, this is what the scriptures say. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people. The Lord had done that. So once again, the favor that Esther now has and Mordecai has, the Lord is doing that. Isn't that amazing? The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians. They plundered the Egyptians. What the enemy has stolen, God intends to redeem and restore. We see it all the time. All the time, what the enemy means for evil, God can turn to good. We know that what the enemy did, the serpent did in the garden, God swiftly promises a reconciler, a redeemer, a restorer, Jesus, to come and reconcile his creation to himself, come and redeem and restore. And so the enemy is trying to take, but God is the one that brings back what the enemy has stolen. It's such a good word. So just be encouraged in that today. They have crazy favor, Esther and Mordecai. This is unlimited authority in getting the signet ring. Absolutely insane. Now, what we need to know is it's been a little over 2 months since the decree from Haman went out for the destruction of the Jews. So they have about 9 months to prepare, the Jews do, for the conflict that Haman has declared is going to occur this day when the Jews are going to be annihilated. All right, now let's see what King Ahasuerus says. Verse 7, then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows. Remember, the gallows were the ones that Haman wanted to hang Mordecai on, and this is not how you would hang someone to death. The gallows were used for someone that was already dead, and they were long, very long, tall poles where you were hanged, but the hanging is an impaling, and it was a warning to not do what that person did, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. Verse 8, but you may write as you please. Such favor, but you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. And so this is going to override the first one that went out. Verse 9, the king's scribes were summoned at that time. It was the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. This is how I can tell you. Scholars have broken down the calendar that was happening at this time on the history of the earth. And so that's how I can tell you it's been about 2 months since the first edict went out. And an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews, to the satraps and governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And so everybody's going to get it in a way they can understand. That's important. And it's going to have to travel to all the officials, all the people that are governing, everybody that's in charge, so that it can pass down from the top all the way to the bottom, so everybody knows what's up. Verse 10, and he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring, authorizing it. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud. And so the king is not only giving the ring, giving the authority, but he's also providing the means in which this is going to go out. And we talked a little bit about how this is like the Pony Express that we would remember in United States history. This is what that looked like then. Verse 11, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives. They are going to be allowed to fight back should anyone come against them. So pay attention here. This is what they're allowed to do. They are allowed to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included. If they're going to send a kid, that kid can be annihilated, and to plunder their goods. So we see the idea here that, like, if you're coming against God's people, if you're going to be an enemy to God's plans and what he's desiring to do, you might just see a turn of events where suddenly you're being plundered. And that's what we see here. Verse 12, on one day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree to every province, being publicly displayed to all people. So it goes out, everybody gets to see it. And the Jews were to be ready on that day, this specific day when this is to take place, to take vengeance on their enemies. So what the enemy is meant for good is about to be flipped in a big way. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command. And the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. Okay. Let me make sure I haven't. Okay, so let's just review. The new edict says the Jews have the right to gather and protect themselves, to defend their lives, to annihilate and to plunder any group that fights against them. Okay, let's finish this up. Verse 15. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white. The white and blue are the colors of the Persian Empire. And with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. Purple means royalty, so he's now given a royal status. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. So where before they were thrown into chaos and despair and confusion over what Haman was doing, now this is making sense and everyone is excited. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. We're going to learn about that holiday next time. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves to be Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen on them. And so there's this really interesting thing that's happening here. And I had to look this up because, okay, well, they're going to side with the Jews now because the Jews suddenly have all of this ability to plunder and should they become their enemies. So there's a little bit of that. But actually, as I was doing research, it really means that they were so in awe. The people in the country, the people in this land were so in awe of the majesty of God, the protection of God. They feared the Jews because they knew that their God was active. Whoever they were serving was moving on their behalf, because how could all of this had been flipped? How could this turn of events had come about if their God hadn't been part of it? And so they become a Jewish convert and they are coming over into serving the God of all ages, and they are coming to know Yahweh Elohim. And so this is super exciting, and it happened because the fear of the Jews had fell over them. They realized there's something about these people because of their God that we better pay attention and take notice. All right, so let me double check and see if I have missed anything. And I do think it's pretty cool that God is bringing converts. God is leading people to himself as he protects and defends his own people. That sounds like something he would do. The people could not deny the fact that the God of the Jews protected them in a magnificent way. So one of the applications for you today is, do you know God is protecting you? Can you look back on your life and see his protection? Can you sense his protection even now? And you might fight against it at times, and you might like your own protection better, self-protection, but I can tell you that nothing compares to the protection of God. Also, are you seeing his favor on your life? Are you able to look back at certain times and say, like, that was definitely the Lord? Because nothing screams louder in the story of Esther, the one book in the Bible that God isn't mentioned at all, than his providential hand. Like, you just can't deny God is moving right now. And have you seen him do that? Have you seen his favor come upon you in different seasons? Or, I mean, we live in his favor because of what Jesus has done for us, but have you seen it in other ways similar to what we're seeing here in Esther? And the final thing is, it doesn't matter what the enemy is threatening. It doesn't matter how scary that might be. God has the final say. God has the final say. Just like in the story of Esther, God came through and delivered his people. And this is a fantastic case. It was amazing to see this unfold. And our deliverance can look like this, and sometimes it can look different than we think. But when we look back, we say, I was delivered then. The Lord intervened then. And at the time it was tough, but now I can see his hand in all of it. And I think that is it. How is God protecting you? Do you notice that today? And are you hearing his voice in the situations that you're in? If they're really tough, make sure you're listening to his voice and not what the enemy is throwing. Much love. I'll see you next week.